Okay, I'm going to give this one a second shot just because I didn't have my microphone set up. Anyway, here it is, the day before 2026. Here it is, New Year's Eve. I I guess it's going to sound really boring, but I think it's kind of exciting. I think it's really exciting. And maybe I'll title it two books, two great books, two books I highly recommend. But I got to tell you how these evolved. And I'm going to describe them a little bit. I really think if a person wants to follow or get involved with these paths, any obstacles or barriers to it, you'll overcome. And they did with my friends that are involved. And sometimes I think about just the words and the stories were quite remarkable to try to. I mean, it's a different culture. It's, India, and the words, but I found it all very fascinating. And to give you an idea, actually, let me just go right to the books. First, let me take myself off. So these two books, and I have to describe them. The one on the left, The Autobiography of a Yogi, is a huge, huge bestseller. And I did grab this many years ago, and I kind of skimmed it, read it. I thought the whole thing was beautiful. And it really led me to the next story. Now, I don't recall it enough to say much other than when I got involved with all of this, it was based on a continuous search. And I was listening to George Harrison sing My Sweet Lord. And at the end of it, it has intermixed in his words, the Hare Krishna mantra. And I looked that up and kind of kept going and going. And I heard that he used to pass out books. And I believe it was both of these. It may have just been Ramakrishna and his disciples. And he'd pass out books to friends that came by. And then I read, Steve Jobs went to my high school. So somehow that connected up. I got curious about him. I can't remember how it all happened. And I heard that he passed out these books and that he had gone to India. And I believe also was but I haven't looked that up to know for sure, Vedanta Hinduism. But I know he was somehow a student of it. But I don't know. I think he did both. But anyway, so I grabbed that book, Autobiography of a Yogi. And there's some interesting interconnectedness of life, and people can say that's a bunch of hooey, Jim. But the friend that got me involved with spirituality at age 18 was a surfer out of San Diego area, and he used to talk about a surfing area called Swami's. And sure enough, it's right below and named after Yogananda, the book after the left. He opened one of his self-realization centers many, many, many years ago, right above that surf spot. And I believe it's called the Self-Realization Center. Not fully sure on that. But it's kind of funny how that's also kind of connected up, and that my dear friend, he didn't tell me about that at the time, but now looking back, it's kind of an interesting story that was the first book, and he was the first one that talked spirituality. I called him about a year ago and thanked him for introducing me to spirituality. And then it's kind of funny how George Harrison introduced me to the Ramakrishna's disciples. So, yeah. Now, the reason I bring these up is they were two of my first ones. And they are just great stories. They're great stories. And let me just read what it says on the back of the one on the right, the Ramakrishna. And the author writes it this way. He says, this is the story of a phenomenon. A phenomenon is always a fact, an object of experience. That is how I shall try to approach Ramakrishna. Ramakrishna, by the way, was 1860 to 1880, passed away, I believe, in 1884 in India. And he has centers all over the world. The Ramakrishna order started, really by all of his disciples, but the great Vivekananda was like the first leader of that. Anyway, it continues to say, I'm not writing this book primarily for the believers or non-believers. In other words, it's not that. It's a story. The sort of reader who is always on the lookout for phenomena. And that's how I look at it. Just wild. It's great. You're learning about culture, religion, something I had never seen before. I only ask you to approach Ramakrishna with the same open-minded curiosity you might feel for any highly unusual human being. And he lists a Julius Caesar, a Catherine of Siena, don't know who that is, a Leonardo da Vinci. They're great stories, and I highly recommend them. And I will say again that if this is going to be something that you follow up on, then maybe I'll talk about the other books. And let me just also end by saying, if you're going to read them, maybe that's all I need to say is this whole idea of phenomena and curiosity. But I will say that as I read them, it took me about 100 pages in to realize the audience of these books. And a lot of times they're talking to gurus or monks, or they're talking to, so it says here, householder versus monk. The audience, sometimes they're talking to the disciples, the monks, and that's going to be different to a householder. And a householder is somebody living in the world, and they have to make a living, and they're making money. So they might say to a monk, give it all up. But the householder, it's okay to make money and feed your family. In fact, you better. And so I thought that was really, that took me a good 100 pages to figure that one out. The same thing with self versus self. I was too blind to see that one had a capital S and one had a little s. So for example, when they say the self-realization centers of the great Yogananda, they're using big S self. They're talking about realization, Brahman, God, consciousness, whatever words they're using for that. And a lot of these words were interchangeable, and I had to get through that, so I'm just kind of warning you. Same with gods, saints, gurus. These words are kind of, yeah, there are a lot of guys out there, a lot of great gurus and saints, a lot of, yeah. But if you look at these as a phenomena, as great saints, as great gurus that are, and their stories are being told, I just think they're great reads. And who knows? I love Sri Ramakrishna, and I believe him to be a saint, a guru, a God in that sense. Yeah. So I think that's, yeah, go grab them. Go grab those books. Take that off, put them back up there now that I've said my Ramakrishna. Oh, and I should say on the one on the right, Christopher Isherwood, he wrote this. Actually, I shouldn't say that. It says Christopher Isherwood. That's an interesting one. Ah, that's right. The gospel was written by somebody else. Okay, so Christopher Isherwood, it's written in today's terms. He died, I believe, in the 1970s or 1980s. So it's a good read. I don't remember Autobiography of a Yogi well enough to know, but other than it's a huge bestseller and people loved it. So we'll just leave it at that. There's two great books. Okay.